which leads into Part 5, the bailout in legacy, from 1858 to the present.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into what is honestly one of the most unbelievable true crime corporate stories in human history. We're talking about the incredible, ruthless, and just globally defining rise and fall of the East India Company. As we go through this visual breakdown, we're going to see exactly how a single business entity managed to fundamentally rewire global economics and politics. I mean, it's a wild story, packed with trade, ambition, betrayal, and absolute power.
Okay, let's dive into this. How on earth does a mere startup, founded by just 125 shareholders, manage to entirely conquer and subjugate a nation that was, by all accounts, an absolute global superpower? To really wrap our heads around the sheer scale of this corporate takeover, we have to kind of zoom out and look at the world as it was back then, rather than how we see it today.
The analysis highlights a pretty stark contrast if we jump back to the 1600s. At the time, the Mughal Empire in India was this massive industrial powerhouse. They accounted for a staggering 25% of global manufacturing. To put that into perspective, that is very comparable to modern-day China's manufacturing dominance. Adjusted for today, we're talking about an economy with a $21 trillion GDP. They were producing the absolute finest textiles in the world, from shawls to khakis. Meanwhile, Britain was relatively poor. They were basically just an island nation desperately trying to figure out how to get a tiny slice of the super lucrative global spice trade.
Which brings us right into Part 1, the hook and the startup, spanning from 1599 to 1608.
And you know what? The whole thing started over a shockingly small number, just 5 shillings. See, in the late 1590s, the Dutch completely controlled the spice trade in Europe, and they randomly decided to hike the price of black pepper, which people literally called black gold back then, by exactly 5 shillings. Well, this arbitrary bump totally infuriated British merchants. So in September of 1599, 24 London merchants got together and basically said, we need our own supply chain. They managed to convince 125 shareholders to scrape together £72,000 and formed a joint stock company. And make no mistake, their one and only objective was profit.
Now, what's really interesting about this slide is what happened next. To actually operate legally, they needed the green line from Queen Elizabeth I. So, in December 1599, she hands them a royal charter granting a strict monopoly on British trade in the East Indies. But here's the crazy part. She essentially handed a private startup extreme sovereign powers. They were legally permitted to mint their own money, draft their own laws, maintain a private army, dictate foreign policy, and even dish out punishments overseas. Just imagine a modern tech giant being given the legal right to declare war and print their own currency today. It's totally wild.
All right, moving into Part 2, market entry and expansion, from 1608 to 1757.
Getting a foothold in a foreign market wasn't easy. In 1608, you've got this diplomat, William Hawkins, showing up in Surat wearing an Afghan dress and speaking some very broken Turkish. The Mughals were totally unimpressed and just sent him packing. It actually took until 1615 for another ambassador, Sir Thomas Roe, to successfully pitch the economic upside of trade, finally securing a royal decree to build coastal factories. Fast forward a bit, and by 1640 they've built Fort St. George in Madras. Then in 1662, they totally lucked out and acquired Bombay simply because the British king got it as a wedding dowry. So, step by step, they're slowly locking down these fragile coastal factory forts.
But hey, progress is rarely a straight line, right? And they soon got hit with what the sources describe as the arrogance penalty. By 1686, this incredibly arrogant company director named Josiah Child decided he was just completely done with paying local taxes in Bengal. In fact, he went so far as to declare direct war on the mighty Mughal Empire, sending in warships and soldiers. And yeah, it was an absolute disaster. The Mughals just crushed the company's forces, seized their factories, and threw their workers in prison. The company was literally forced to grovel at Emperor Aurangzeb's feet, beg for forgiveness for years, and pay a massive 1.5 lakh fine just to get back to business. They learned a very harsh lesson that day. Brute force alone wasn't going to cut it.
That takes us to Part 3, the hostile takeover, from 1757 to 1765.
So the crucial point is understanding their hostile takeover strategy, which shifted them from coastal traders to political puppet masters. Starting with the Battle of Plassey in 1757, they basically throw regular trade out the window. When dealing with a strict ruler in Bengal, they didn't just fight him on the battlefield. They went behind his back and bribed his army commander, Mir Jafar. After winning the battle via pure betrayal, they prop up Mir Jafar as a puppet king. And why a puppet? Because they wanted absolutely zero part of the headache of actually running a country. They just wanted to pull the strings on trade policy and siphon off the wealth quietly from the background.
The final nail in the coffin for regional independence really hits after the Battle of Buxar. In 1765, the Treaty of Allahabad is signed, and this is a monumental legal turning point. The East India Company was officially granted Divani rights. This meant that a private British corporation now had the absolute legal authority to collect and control all the massive tax revenues of the incredibly wealthy Bengal region. They had essentially captured the entire treasury.
The source has this brilliant toll plaza analogy to explain what this looked like in practice. Think of it like a government outsourcing a toll plaza to a private operator. Normally, the operator collects the toll, keeps a small cut, and passes the rest as a fixed fee to the government so they can, maintain the roads. But the East India Company acted like a totally rogue operator. They bypassed the government completely, pocketed absolutely all the toll money for themselves, and flat out refused to maintain the roads or look after the public, basically claiming administration wasn't their job. They had completely hijacked the entire economic system.
Now for Part 4, Resource Extraction and Tragedy, covering the ruthless expansion from the 1770s to the 1850s.
The analysis points to a staggering human cost here. By tripling the tax burden on the local people and aggressively hoarding resources, the East India Company's policies directly fueled the Great Bengal Famine of 1770. The sources report a heartbreaking number, resulting in the deaths of up to 10 million people, or 1 crore. And the company actually forced the survivors to pay the taxes of the people who had literally starved to death, all to protect their precious profit margins amidst this immense human suffering.
And this brilliantly illustrates the lasting institutional legacy of that era. The title collector, which, if you're familiar with modern India, is a title still used today for district administrative officers, was literally invented by the East India Company. That role was created with one very specific primary function: to systematically and ruthlessly extract taxes from the public to feed the corporate bottom line.
Flush with all this extracted wealth from Bengal fueling their military, they set out to eliminate any remaining regional competition. They engaged in multiple wars to take down formidable leaders like Tipu Sultan down south, where they looted an estimated 2 million euros from his treasury when he died. They conquered the powerful Marathas in the Sikh Empire. They even used this sneaky legal loophole known as the Doctrine of Lapse, which basically let the company just swallow up any kingdom, like Awadh and Jhansi, if a ruler happened to die without a male heir. Piece by piece, the corporation devoured the subcontinent.
Which leads into Part 5, the bailout in legacy, from 1858 to the present.
Eventually, the company became so absurdly wealthy that its executives were heading back to England and just straight up buying political influence, bribing members of parliament to pass favorable policies. But between massive insider trading, rampant corruption, and eventual widespread rebellion in India, the British government was finally forced to step in. Following heavy parliamentary investigations, they passed the Government of India Act in 1858. The British Crown effectively bailed out the company, directly taking over all of the EIC's assets, its territories, and its military. Corporate rule was officially over, and direct British imperial rule had begun.
According to some really striking economic analysis by historian Utsa Patnaik, over those roughly 200 years of corporate and later Crown rule, a staggering $45 trillion was siphoned right out of India. Just think about that number. This colossal wealth transfer effectively crippled the region's ability to modernize its own tech or industry, while at the exact same time, it funded Western industrialization and bankrolled major global conflicts, including both world wars.
Yet history always has this deep sense of irony, doesn't it? Today, the remnants of this once terrifying global monopoly exist in a completely different form. The intellectual property and the brand name were actually bought up by an Indian entrepreneur named Sanjeev Mehta. So right now, the company operates out of London as a luxury brand, selling high-end tea, coffee, and chocolates. The mighty corporate empire has, quite literally, come full circle.
Let's move to the final slide and see how this builds into the source's most provocative argument. The prosperity of the modern Western capitalist system is fundamentally built upon this historical extraction. When we look at global wealth distribution today, it is honestly impossible to ignore the echoes of this 125-person startup that completely redrew the map of the world, which leaves us with a pretty lingering question. When we marvel at the infrastructure and wealth of the modern developed world, who really paid the initial startup costs? Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I hope it gives